a poor leader had a mob on his hands. There were a few officers who were shot or killed or whatever by the men in Vietnam. Sometimes because the men were given orders that they regarded as dangerous and ludicrous, and sometimes for other reasons. But that's not our subject here. We skip all the way to page 36 now. The faulty strategy of a limited war of attrition had produced a stalemate in Vietnam by the end of 1968, and yet it had dragged on for 5 more years. And infantry tactics had generally deteriorated through an over-reliance on artillery and air power. Pause for a second there. Now, as I mentioned before, artillery and air power were extremely effective in killing large numbers of the enemy that we never even saw. We only drew fire from them, and so we knew generally where to pull the air attacks in. But by relying on that year after year after year, pretty soon the infantry itself is not worth much except to call in air support. In a practice that stemmed from the political consideration to hold down casualties, ground commanders from the start were encouraged to use firepower lavishly in order to conserve lives. Rather than using traditional infantry tactics to attack the enemy, U.S. units in contact increasingly resorted to rolling up into a defensive perimeter and calling for supporting artillery fire and air support. As one military critic wrote, by 1967, only a foolhardy or a desperate commander would ever engage hostile elements by any means other than with firepower. That defensive orientation and the political need to limit casualties led during the withdrawal years to an increased dependence on fire bases. So if you're going to be using howitzers and so on to do everything, then you're going to have clusters of howitzers and stuff throughout the country. U.S. units holed up in their hilltop castles, in effect ceding territory and movement to the mobile enemy. So we put our howitzer bases up on the tops of hills, and we don't leave the base, and the rest of the country is theirs. General Westmoreland came to criticize this fire-based psychosis, and predicted that for future wars, such a narrow tactical doctrine would have to be bred out of young officers whose experience of warfare was restricted to Vietnam. So he said, this isn't working here, and in the future we're going to have to get rid of it. The Army's senior generals were among the last to recognize these changes. General Bruce Palmer, Vice Chief of Staff during the Army's most turbulent years, 68 to 72, believed that it took approximately 2 years for knowledge of change in the field to filter up to the leaders in Washington. 2 years? Now, I happen to know that in World War II, knowledge moved a little bit quicker than that. A lot quicker than that. So, probably months, maybe. Maybe several months. But the whole goddamn war took 4 years. So for us to not be able to make changes only with a lag of 2 years, World War II would have dragged on forever. 6, 8, 10 years at least, you know. And that's the kind of sort of attitude to say that, well, I mean, it's not this guy's attitude, it's Washington's attitude, that changes and stuff, we don't need to be too concerned about them unless the public gets in a large uproar and the media keeps reporting on something going wrong, and eventually the Congress will look at it. Very, very lazy way that we fought the Vietnam War. We thought we needed to do it on the one hand, and yet no one wanted to do the job that needed to be done on the other hand. Continuing. Now the reason that this was so slow, the information moving up was so slow, this was probably because small unit leaders, up to a battalion commander, did not know how to react to the restlessness of the troops and hence did not report it. Right? What the hell are they going to do about the fact that all their troops are smoking weed and don't want to go out on the trail and are lazy and aren't moving the weapons around and disobeying orders and stuff? And the leaders of the units themselves sometimes were as lazy as all that. So they just didn't report the problems upward. Then another year might elapse, Palmer felt, before the news of a change in the theater reached Washington. The state of the Army did not really come to the attention of the Army's top leadership until the time of the Cambodian incursion in May 1970. All of a sudden, you're blindsided, Palmer said. But it wasn't sudden at all. It had probably been going on for a year and a half. We were slow catching on. So you may know that President Nixon said, we won't be going into Cambodia. We're not fighting in Cambodia. We don't have troops in Cambodia. And we had troops in Cambodia. And some of the troops that got hurt in the firefights and stuff coming back to the hospitals, and the nurses and doctors said, where did you get in action? And they say, I was in Cambodia. And they say, that's not true. We don't have troops in Cambodia. And they say, yeah, whatever. So once they started going into Cambodia, and they had to use slightly different tactics. They didn't have the infrastructure that they had in Vietnam right across the border there. So they had to use slightly different tactics than their usual fire call-in air power tactics. And the infantry were not able to do it. Not even able to do it. As he said, they were blindsided. We skip a few paragraphs. Nowhere was the failure of leadership in Vietnam more apparent than during the killings of civilians in the hamlet of My Lai, M-Y-L-A-I, 4 on March 16, 1968, and in the American division after the event. In the later years of the war, the division reverted to calling itself the 23rd Infantry Division in an effort to divorce itself from the shame of the Americal, America 1st Division. I don't know how bad the My Lai incident was. It says it left the incident left an indelible stain on the performance of the U.S. Army in Vietnam, leading to criticism of strategy, tactics, and leadership. And, by extension, raising questions about the entire U.S. effort in Vietnam. Okay, here's the question. Where were the good Germans when we were fighting Hitler? Some of them were derailing trains in Germany. Where were the good Vietnamese when we were fighting in Vietnam? Where were the good Japanese when we were fighting against Japan? Now, the answer in some of these is, some of the good Germans were buried in the ruins of Dresden, or burned in the fire at Dresden. Some of the good Japanese were destroyed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I don't know what they were doing the whole war. We destroyed almost every major city in Japan before we even got the nukes ready, and that's where some of them were. But look, war sucks. Okay, it's deadly, large-scale catastrophe. It sucks. It's like when you get sick and you gotta throw up, you gotta vomit. You know, nobody says it's fun. No one says we're gonna like it. No one says there's a good way to do it. But you gotta do it. Sorry. And that's what war is. So you should go to war when you think it's important. You should get done with it as quick as you can. And you should accomplish your goals with the utmost efficiency possible. That might require large-scale carpet bombing. It might require going into villages or towns, and if anybody shoots, pull out and level it. Now, once you take territory, you should hold it. And that seems to me to be the biggest problem we had in Vietnam, was we thought we were fighting an enemy, and actually we were fighting for a country to hold the land. We wanted people on this patch of land to know that there are certain things that do not fly. For example, talking about communism, talking about violating rights, talking about taking away property and the freedom of individuals. And anyone who tries that, and any town that disobeys and disrupts our plans, will be in deep shit and may be destroyed. War is ugly. And look here, one little village, it was probably a catastrophe. It probably shouldn't have happened. They slay innocent people, women, children. My point is that by backing off and never doing that, you don't get anywhere. You get nowhere. You get shit like the division of North and South Vietnam and the creation of a little hermit state. And you get shit like the chopping off of pieces of Israel to give to Palestinians who don't even want to run a state. They just want to kill Jews. And we're trying to give them a state. They don't want a state.